Um, okay, so sorry for this audio problems. For some reason, my my input recognizes the same output, and it plays it back with like 8 milliseconds of delay or something silly. I really have no idea what's going on, but oh man, the solution will be that I'm just gonna turn down the microphone. But so this is the problem. It's not just the microphone, but the whole uh, output of my computer is being recognized as this microphone input, which I don't even understand how could this happen. But I just don't really have the brain capacity right now to try to fix it. So I'm just gonna do this from OBS. I'm just gonna mute this one when I'm done with what I have to say. And yeah, okay. So sorry about this once again. Um, so as far as this lead sound design goes in general, I don't quite understand why. So this lead stem, for example, tends to be have more low frequencies than certain bass layers, which is just I mean, overall I think these layering is just way too much. Like in general, if happy to hear, man, happy to hear. All good. So in general, you know, what I would recommend from a production standpoint is to like forget these panning of the bass, for example. Like, I mean, I don't know if this was on purpose, where you pan this one to the right and one to the left, but this is just, you know, it's not very good in my opinion. With leads, it could be good, but even then, I just really don't recommend this, because like these are too many layers going on at the same time. And so the thing is that you want to sound as good as possible with as few layers as possible. You know, that's what's going to give you this professional sound, or I don't really know how else to say this. If you have 5 layers, and what I'm going to do, I probably will just end up muting a couple of these, because I just think these are too much, and they are also in the same frequency range. They are just competing against each other, and it's, you know, it's just not a great idea in my opinion, at least. So but this is from the production side. You know, as far as mixing goes, I'm gonna try to make it work, but it's just, you know, if you have one sound that sounds amazing. That's always better than if you have 5 that are none of those 5s are like really all that good, but then you add them together and it's 5 sounds really that are not that good, and instead of just having one sound which is like really amazing. But in my opinion, that should be the goal, especially with basses and leads, because like drums and whatnot, obviously you can layer those with the exception of the kick. But yeah, so this is just my advice, looking at this for the first time, basically, that I feel that these layers are a little bit too, so they are basically overwhelming each other instead of like having the focus of one, which is probably what I will end up doing here. Hey VLT, thanks for tuning in. Nice, man. Happy to hear. Happy to hear. Or maybe what I'm noticing right now is maybe you accidentally, or I messed up this one somehow. I don't know. Or maybe these are accidentally from the bass exports instead of the lead exports, which would certainly explain my problem with it. But all right, I'm gonna figure this one out. So to me, this bass is like it's not bad, but it sounds a little bit too digital to me. It's just never going to be as good as if I don't know. So I'm just gonna probably in the end I will use yours, but let me just try to recreate this somehow how I would feel. It's probably will be better, but I'm just gonna try. This is a common misconception that if you have a not so great sounding sound, then you can just add whatever effects, distortions and compressions and whatever, and that's going to make it sound good. I wish that would be the case, but you know, in most cases, people are mistaking mixing for sound design. Like 80% of really what a track is, it's basically comes down to how good your sound design is. Because if that's good to begin with, the mixing again will be self-explanatory, or the mix is going to solve itself basically, because you have the least amount of sounds, which is especially like I mean, hopefully it makes sense what I'm talking about. But if you just add saturation to something that's not super great already to begin with, it's that's firefighting, and that's not getting it right from the get-go. So it's yeah, I mean, certainly there are some times when you would use saturation on certain types of bass lines, but this is not one of it, you know, because this, so it already has enough high end, it already has enough of this vroom 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 quality to it, but these are just sounding a little bit too digital to me. So I'm just, you know, not digital is not the right word, but just plastic, you know, or I don't know how to say this. In the end, as I've said, I will probably still use these, but I'm just gonna try to recreate it and see if maybe I can layer it with something else from what I make, and hopefully that's going to solve the problem what I hear with it. Yeah, and in the case of this lead, I just feel that all of these layers basically have, I think it's a reverb effect or something like that, because it's too wide, but at the same time it's not full enough. This is I think this is a reverb because of a reverb effect. It's not a bad idea at all, but it's just it's challenging to mix it, and you're effectively creating a problem for yourself, because this is not really well, it's not that it's not possible, but it's just never going to sound as good as if you would have a full sound, which then you add a little bit of reverb to it, in my opinion. So, but I might be wrong with how you made it. Maybe this is like a dimension expander or something similar to that, which is again, it's a good idea, but I just think that I just feel they are a little bit overdone here. And if I reduce the stereo after the fact, it's never the same as if you reduce the stereo effect on the plugin itself. But yeah, I'm just gonna try to work with this. It's not that terrible. I'm just saying that this is again a possible point of improvement and a possible point of focus in future productions, but where you could look at. And for example, in the case of this is basically just a serum base with a couple effects on it. What I just want to say that in terms of basses, in general, I just don't really think it's a good idea to make basses wide, like how you bend these your layers, for example, because whenever you look at any professional music, the basses will always be basically in the center and in mono. And this is not because of how club sound systems translate mono to stereo and all these are just myths. It's not really the case, but the way it works is if you have a mono signal, you will if the left and the right channel in a stereo export plays the same thing, that's what we call mono, because that basically comes from the sender. In that case, you will have more headroom, therefore you can push the levels more, so it's going to appear more louder, basically more more in your face. Whereas if you even just have a slight delay between the left and the right channel, in stereo, your headroom will disappear, and you can't get away with as high levels without distortion, without digital distortion, obviously, as if you would have the sources in mono. So this is why we have the kick in mono. It's not because it's like, obviously it wouldn't sound natural if it would only come from the left speaker or only from the right speaker. But the reason why we don't pan it is because then we can push the level of it higher. Because if a sound is in mono, you have more headroom, more digital headroom, and this is the whole point of it, really. So this is why I would highly recommend to instead of using 5 bass layers and like trying to pan them, or like just, it's okay to layer basses, but then you have to be very mindful about the frequency range, which where each of these basses will compete for the same frequency range, basically. And unless you EQ out those points, or like you just make it it's hard to properly explain this, but the way to layer basses is to have one for the low end, one for the mid range, and one for the high end, for example, but not for have a left bass and a right bass. That just again, it just makes it more complicated than how it is, and makes your mix much more all over the place, instead of just having one focused bass line. That's the takeaway, really. That you're making it harder to digest, basically, making your music harder to digest. And at the end of the day, electronic music is basically at this point where we are competing for the same Spotify playlist and everything. It's basically pop music, and pop music should use the least amount of sounds to get the maximum amount of impact. So this is what, just a production tip, basically. Yeah, so in the case of the leads, I don't have a problem really with the tonal balance, and it's so EQ wise it sounds good, but the stereo image is what again what's problematic here. It's just not a focused lead. If you have a focused lead, which then you decide to later on do this delay type of effect where you move the right away from the left, so that it's not in the middle but in the left and right side, that could work. But again, I feel this is again a little bit too stereo and a little bit too complicated like this. It's just it's not terrible, of course, but I just feel that again this is so this is the same thing again with the leads, but I've talked about the bass. So this is a returning point, basically. Hey Antes, and happy you enjoyed. Hey Lake Snake, what's up? As if there's less delay, lol. I think that the chat is going to be the same because it's how it runs through the restream stuff. So yeah, there's just not much I can do about that. Sorry. Um, less delay, really? That's good. That's probably a good thing. Instead of doing like this, I think I will ask you, Conor, for another to separate this drop percussion channel if possible, so without this high peaking, very high frequency sound and the rest, because the rest is sounding very good already, but that one is not as much. So good, like the reverb. Yeah, man, me too. Actually, just recently I found this reverb which is free, and this is so good of a plate reverb. I think this is even better than like anything I've ever used basically, and it's free. So look this one up. Originally I was looking for a pitch correction type of plugin, but it's not bad from them. That's called Grayon or Graylon. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But this is not as good, if I'm being dead honest, as if, for example, this stock Logic pitch correction. It's also not a bad plugin, but it's more of an effect plugin rather than this natural pitch correction plugin. But that reverb is actually very good because, yeah, I just tend to use it a lot lately. Oh, sorry, I left the microphone on, so this was ping ponging. Sorry. But so this bass again. I'm not going to use this one. It's if I would have to recreate this track, I would probably use a solution like this. But in the context, it's yours is sounding better, so I'm just gonna go with yours. But what I wanted to touch on is that you can hear that it's already clipping. That this weird sounding distortion on the top of this bass. If you listen for it, it's very clearly audible. Sounding like a click. Oh, sorry. So as if the signal would go into the red, but it's not going into the red. It's a problem how it's already synthesized, you know. So maybe. Yeah, I've realized it. Sorry. So hopefully it makes sense what I'm talking about with this. So you should have maybe bounced it on lower levels, or just not distort these basses, or something like that, because it's just not sounding, you know, as good as it could without this this clipping effect, in my opinion at least. I left this thing on again, sorry. Yeah, sorry. It's just so bad. I really don't know how to fix this. So I put it on because so if I zoom in, you can see that the difference between this hit and this hit is just way too much. And instead of using a compressor, which will have an attack time, like so the main problem with using a compressor here is the compressors all have an attack time, however slow that is. And I want to tame these ones to, like, you know, to stop here, and then the level difference between this one and this one is not going to be as harsh, because this is probably the result of very heavy side chaining, which again, something I cannot undo after the fact, but I can reduce these transients, you know, to make it a little bit more controlled. And I'm doing it on all of these, because these, just by looking at it, I can see that these all have the same side chaining effect on them. So for example, in the case of this sub bass, compressor is pretty good to go. YouTube will be your best bet to fixing it. What do you mean by that? It's the problem is not with YouTube, because so this is probably something in OBS is acting up. I really don't know. But YouTube has nothing to do with it, because if I just press record instead of streaming, this problem still is there. That's how I know the problem is either with OBS or something with the input routing to begin with. I don't know yet how to fix it, but I'm going to look into it later today. So what I'm just checking is that without these bass sounds, I pretty much like everything else, how it sounds right now. At the moment, as you can see, nothing yet, but I will go for this one in the end. I'm pretty sure. I've been using this for a while now, and it's really just the best ever maximizer / limiter tool that I've ever used. So it's just sounding super transparent and super. So it does not damage the audio as much as, for example, the Pro L2, for example, is another very good limiter, but I just feel that this is not as transparent, and it's a little bit more coloring, you know, especially in the low mid range. I feel this limiter, so whenever I can hear this limiter. In the case of the where are you? In the case of the Ozo Maximizer, I cannot hear this limiter. If I set it to transient and set a little bit of transient emphasis to it, and like obviously I will need to adjust this one, I just cannot even hear. I can't hear a sound of it. It's all just very transparent and like kind of very natural, if this makes sense. So this is what I've been using lately, but I still don't want to mess with the limiting until I have the mix balance better. Yeah, so I would definitely would like to ask for this drop percussion channel with all the sounds separately if possible. Yeah, so I would. This is of course up to you because this one has no problem with it. But I just think personally that this would sound better an octave higher because it's again messing up this frequency range. And here is the bass layers. Here are some of the lead layers. So it's already a very congested. If that's, I'm not sure if that's the right word. I just and that's what I think I want to say. Here, so it's a little bit too much here. So I would like move it an octave higher, like somewhere around in this range, because then it's just less competing with anything else. It's just I'm just not going to be able to balance this one out in this range as good as I would be able to balance it out an octave higher, if this makes sense. But using a pitch shifter plugin, it just sounds super like weird. So I don't want to do that.
Oh, when you're coming back around, when you're coming back around, back around, when you're coming back around.
Yeah, so for the time being, I'm going to leave it with your levels without me processing anything, because it's just so unless I have all these sounds separately, I cannot really balance this one out better. So yeah, please send it. Yeah, okay, you already wrote, thanks. How do you go about mixing dry vocals? Well, I'm going to make them less dry. That's that's what I can do. I mean, it's different every time. In this case, I've also asked for the dry acapella, which he sent over to me, and I processed it myself. By that I mean I just pitched it down, but I haven't set up any chain on it just yet. I think in the case of this track, I will still go with his because it's sounding good. Melodin, not really. I do all the audio editing in Ableton, so. So now it's actually about time that I set up the end limiter. Is it? Okay. I almost always set everything like this by default, and then I'm just gonna adjust it with compare. So I'm just going to adjust it to what I wanna hear. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Okay, so I think it's slowly but surely getting where I wanted to get it. So next up is to get the vocals right. Oh, sorry, this is not vocals, but these are. So sorry again. I left this thing on. So in the case of this vocal ad-lib, which is going over the drop, I would like to ask for a version which doesn't move left and right. I can redo it, but to be honest, I wouldn't do it. So what I would do myself is I would just grab the basically the mono channel, and I'm gonna show it how.
Back around. Right, it ain't right, right, it ain't right. Oh no, you're calling my phone. I'm being patient, but I'm all alone. Oh no, it ain't right, right, it ain't right, right, it ain't. Right, it ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, it ain't right, it ain't right. Oh no, you're calling my phone. I'm being patient, but I'm all alone. You've got me saying words in my head, filling my mind with these images, yeah. And it's the way that you look at me, makes me feel. Ain't right, it ain't right, it ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, it ain't right.
I think I'm just going to remake this one instead, because it also probably doesn't sound as good as it could if I remade it. So I'm gonna try it.
Saying words in my head, filling my mind with these images, yeah. Yeah. And it's the way that you look at me, makes me feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, it ain't right, it ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, it ain't right, it ain't right. Oh no, you're calling my phone. I'm being patient, but I'm all alone. Staying faithful, and I'll never know when you're coming back around. when you're coming back around. When you're coming back around. Saying words in my head, filling my mind with these images, yeah. And it's the way that you look at me, makes me feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't.
Hey, show starter. Phasing issues so what do you mean by phasing issues? Because I don't record anything. I'm basically inside of a computer all the time. Phasing issues are much more problematic when you record something with multiple microphones. If you have something that's one source of audio which has phasing issues, that's it basically. At that point you can't really do anything else unless you have all the other channels. If you have other channels, there are quite a few phasing plugins out there, such as this. So there's a UAD one which I know. I'm not sure how it's called, but if I see the name, I will know what it is. Never mind. Actually, I don't really know, because I don't really have to deal with phasing issues. It's the benefit of always making music that's made with computers, that you don't really have to deal with phasing issues.
You've got me saying words in my head, filling my mind with these images, yeah. And it's the way that you look at me, makes me feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no. You're calling my phone, I'm being patient, but I'm all alone. Staying faithful and when you're coming back around. Saying words in my head, filling my mind with these images, yeah. And it's the way that you look at me, makes me feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, you're calling my phone, I'm being patient, but I'm all alone. Staying faithful and I'll never know when you're coming back around. When you're coming back around. When you're coming back around. Back around. Faithful and I'll never know when you're coming back around. Filling my mind with you look at me, feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, you're calling my back around.
Okay, so the latency is like too much for me to make this while being on stream. So I will just remake this thing while I'm not streaming at the same time, because it just takes way too much time for me to actually listen and then compare and listen and compare and listen and compare, because so I'm pressing space and it takes like a good second to start the playback. Actually, it's so much latency, but overall I think we are getting there. to be honest. It's not really all that much that's missing. The groove has to be so I have to have this one in all the different sounds, and then basically it's gonna be done very, very fast. The only thing that's left, it's again, the track is a little bit too low heavy at the moment, but that's because I just felt like, you know, this is how it sounded best in the case of these many bass layers. But once I have these groove elements, I will balance these things out to occupy the high mid and the high end more, basically. Yeah, and then remaking this. So this one is what's left still. Because otherwise it sounds good. The only thing I still don't really like are these bass sounds, because I believe still what I said at the beginning of this stream, that I would much rather go for one bass sound that sounds good on its own, and that's just one bass line that's really good and really amazing, and enhance that one instead of using 4 different ones that are like trying to patch each other, or like it's just never gonna be the same, you know. So this is the only thing I personally don't really enjoy about this track. But as far as the balance goes, I believe this is the best how it could be, basically.
I can't breathe.
And there's this guitar channel which I still need to add, and yeah, basically this is it. I'm going to play through the track, how much I have ready of it, and I think I'm going to finish this stream right.
You've got me saying words in my head, filling my mind with these images, yeah. And it's the way that you look at me, makes me feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no. You're calling my phone, I'm being patient, but I'm all feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, you're calling my phone, I'm being
I don't low cut everything where bass is not needed. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't do. It always depends on. So one of the first things I do whenever I wanna inspect a sound is that what I just did here. I put on this Pro Q3, and if I see something here, and it's a combination of seeing and hearing it too, because if I see something but it doesn't bother me, then I probably won't cut it. But if I hear something that's, you know, more rumbly, so to speak, then I will cut it. Otherwise, it's so in theory, yes. In practice, it's never going to sound as good as if you left some detail in there, because so the way you should be thinking about this is that each of these sounds have a certain character and a certain overtone profile is what how I would say it. It's like, you know, there's the oh, it's so hard to I think I can show it what I mean. So for example, if I put on this plugin, so normally it shouldn't have anything here in the lows, right?
I'm being patient.
The output of Logic is not important. Just look at this this waveform. Now, if I enable Saturn and like change this one to like whatever really, and I add in this saturation, It doesn't show up here, but it shows up here. Like you can see that it generates these low like these are not overtones, but these are undertones. But these are the result of some sort of a distortion and or like saturation. And sometimes this sounds natural. If it doesn't sound natural to me, then this is what I will do, obviously. But it's not necessary every time, and it's always a trade-off between preserving the character of the original sound or being able to push it more. If I don't need to push it more, it's I would much rather go for preserving character if it sounds good on its own. In the case if it's like, you know, just some silly digital distortion, then obviously just get rid of that. It's not going to be needed.
I know you call.
So for example, in the case of this guitar, I don't even really hear a difference between low cutting and not low cutting. So it's probably either Conor already did it, so that's whatever I do at that point is will obviously have no effect, or it just sounds good as it is. And in those cases, it's probably not super important to do it.
You've got me saying words in my head, filling my mind with these images, yeah. And it's the way that you look at me, makes me feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, right, right. It ain't right, right, right. It ain't right. Oh no, you're calling my phone. I'm being patient, but I'm all alone. Staying faithful, and I'll never know when you're coming back around. When you're coming back around.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said, it's true to some extent, and it's true in theory, because obviously the less frequencies you have at the same time going, the louder you can, the more headroom you have. That's the point of getting rid of low frequencies. Because so the way it works is actually I'm just gonna show it because it's easier. The frequencies you have in like this range, in until 300 hertz or so, will have a very, very, very noticeable effect on the rest of the frequency spectrum. But vice versa, this is not true. So the high ends don't really color the low ends, but whereas the low end, if you have a very if you have a track which has very, very so much going on in the low end, that's going to have an effect on the high end. It's just not going to let as much of the high end shine, or like it's really hard. I don't know how to say this in English, but this is the main point of it. Like the reason you want to sometimes low cut is because you feel that the track is losing shine and losing brightness, I guess, without it. But if that's not the case, then obviously you have to, like, this goes without saying that if it's clashing with the kick, then obviously get rid of the range where the kick hits and the clashing instrument. But I personally think that it's a much better way to look at it in a side chaining way, where you preserve the frequencies, but then you duck it out when the kick hits. Even in the case of the bass, instead of like EQing the bass to have no bass frequencies, that would make very little sense. It's just a much better way to do it, to use sidechain. So yeah, this is how I view it. So in many cases I will low cut, but not all the time. Thanks man, perfect. And yeah, so one thing I can still add to this topic, maybe, that if you're only working with digital sounds, so that nothing comes from out of the box, then this is less of an issue to begin with, because you don't get these saturations, or unless you specifically put on the sounds, because these plugins such as the Serum or Silence, or like whatever, these plugins are so clean that they again, unless you deliberately go for effects that will sound in a way that where you put something in this range, then it's not even going to add anything noticeable there. So yeah, it's just, so this is how I look at it. Again, I'm sometimes low cutting, sometimes not cutting, sometimes I even low cut the bass where I feel that it's just so one thing that you can end up with, again, this is just to touch on this subject a little bit more, is what's called DC offset. And again, this is not so much of an issue with in the box producing, but for example, this plugin, if I have this floor setting enabled, it produces artificial DC offset, which is basically emulating the hardware unit of this same it's not the same name. I think it's called Expressor in its hardware version. But yeah, so whatever, that might create a DC offset, and in those cases I will just put a low cut filter like this, or maybe even 12 is enough, and just like this, so that it gets rid of that. But in most cases there's really just no need for it. Man, you have to listen for it. Like, that's what can I say to this? Like, listen for it, and if you don't hear it on your speakers, then use headphones. That's really all I can say. You can sidechain the kick but not bass. What do you mean? How can I not sidechain the bass? I can sidechain the bass to the kick and everything else to the kick. Like, that's the whole point. That without the kick, everything should sound roughly balanced. And obviously, if some other instruments are getting in the way of the bass, and this is why I recommend using just one bass layer, because then there's nothing else that it could be. So if there's only one layer, that can not have any interference issues, because there's only one layer. If you have two layers, those can have interference issues. But yeah, so I just think that in most cases it's not that big of a problem as it might seem. But if you hear rumbling, cut it out. That's good.
You've got me saying words in my head, filling my mind with these images, yeah. And it's the way that you look at me, makes me feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, it ain't right, it ain't right. Oh no, it ain't right, it ain't right, it ain't right. Oh no, you're calling my phone, I'm being patient, but I'm all alone. Staying faithful and I'll never know when you're coming back. I'm being patient, but I'm all alone. Staying faithful and the way that you look at me makes me feel like I can't breathe. It ain't right, it ain't right.
No, sidechaining to the kick, everything else to the kick. I mean, cutting away all sub-low frequencies from all other instruments so that the bass has space. Yeah, this is good, because you cannot sidechain all instruments to the bass the same way you do with the kick. And thanks for replying, bro. Technically you can, by the way, but yeah, it's of course it's not it won't sound super natural, but it's possible actually, because you can just set up whatever sidechain you want, you know, using a compressor like this. You can set it to the bass even. It's not just you can just sidechain everything to the kick, but you can instead, I sometimes do this, for example, when you have two vocal stuff which has to be being played at the same time. The less important vocal of those two, I will sidechain to the other vocal so that it gets out of the way of the other one, because it's not generally it's not a good idea to have two vocals playing at the same time. But yeah, it can be done. But so I understand what you mean, and by all means, if you feel that the sounds are rumbling, then cut it out, of course. But I won't do that all the time, because I just don't feel that's necessary. And sometimes, in some cases, it's not going to sound as natural as if I were to preserve the character of the original sound, because sometimes I want that saturation to be there. Not very often, but it happens.
All in my right, it ain't right, it ain't right. Back around when you're coming back around. When you're coming back around.
Okay, so once I have the percussion channels separately, I will be able to like get this one going, because with the exception of this one channel, for everything else, this high-end boost works really well. So I will keep that. But yeah, so at this point I will end the stream and finish this one off stream, either later today or tomorrow. But I think it's already sounds pretty good. I forgot to put the reference of what Conor sent me as his original, to put it in the project, but I will export it and we'll compare it to that, and we'll make other adjustments later on. So thank you so much for watching this stream and for all the questions. Feel free to leave me even more in the comments, and I will try my best to answer all of them. And yeah, low cut is, in general, it's a good